August 1945. A quiet English countryside house hides a secret the world wouldn't learn for decades. Inside its walls sit 10 of Germany's most powerful military minds and nuclear scientists, men who once served a regime that dreamed of ruling the world. They believe they're safe here. They believe they're simply being held until the war fully ends. What they don't know is that every chair, every lamp, every wall around them is wired with hidden microphones. British intelligence is listening to every breath they take. And then, on the morning of August 6th, a British officer steps inside the room with a single sheet of paper in his hand. He clears his throat. The German generals barely look up till they hear the words that freeze the air in the room. America has destroyed the Japanese city of Hiroshima with one bomb. One weapon, one blast, one city gone. The first response is laughter. They call it propaganda. Impossible. A fantasy. But the British officer doesn't smile. He repeats the sentence. The room falls into a silence so heavy it feels like the walls themselves are listening. What happens next? Every whispered argument, every confession, every moment of panic was secretly recorded. And for the first time since the war began, these generals realize a truth they never considered. America just won a race Germany didn't even know it had lost. Before we go any deeper into this unbelievable moment of World War II history, make sure you subscribe so you never miss these untold wartime stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The place was called Farm Hall, a charming country house from the outside. But in August 1945, it served a far darker purpose. The British had transformed it into a silent trap, a prison designed not with bars or chains, but with microphones, buried in every corner. Every step echoed, every whisper was captured, every conversation became intelligence. Inside this quiet estate, 10 of Germany's most influential nuclear scientists and higher-ranking military thinkers lived in a strange limbo. They weren't treated like ordinary prisoners. They were given food, books, gardens to walk in. They were prisoners all the same, kept isolated, controlled, carefully observed. Just weeks earlier, these men had been the backbone of Germany's scientific pride. They came from prestigious institutes, elite universities, and secret research centers. They had worked under Hitler's regime, some willingly, some reluctantly, on the kinds of scientific breakthroughs that could have changed the direction of the war. They believed in German engineering, German physics, German superiority. Even in capture, many felt the Allies lacked the brilliance to match what Germany had once dreamed of accomplishing. The British, however, had one goal. Needy answers, real answers. How close had Germany come to building an atomic bomb? Had they secretly mastered nuclear fission? Were they weeks away from creating the weapon that America had been racing to finish? And if they had the science, why didn't they succeed? Farm Hall wasn't just a prison. It was a mirror pointed at Germany's scientific soul. As the generals settled into their new reality, they spoke freely, unaware that their conversations were being recorded for history. They debated theories over tea, argued about physics in the living room, and reminisced about projects they once believed would change the world. But all of that calm was about to shatter, because on August 6, 1945, news arrived that would punch through their confidence like a blast wave. In the hours before the announcement, Farm Hall felt almost peaceful. The German generals wandered through the garden, debating science, theory, and the future that awaited them once the war formally concluded. Many still held on to the belief that Germany's scientific work had been unmatched. They spoke proudly about equations they'd solved, reactors they'd designed, and experiments they believed the Allies could only dream of understanding. Their tone was confident, at times even arrogant. They were prisoners, yes, but in their minds, they were still the intellectual elite of Europe. Inside the dining room, small groups sat around a table discussing nuclear theory. Werner Heisenberg, Germany's most famous physicist, paced beside a window, explaining particle behavior with calm authority. Others listened, nodding, correcting, debating. They believed they knew how far nuclear science could go, and they believed no other nation, especially America, could have surpassed them. To them, the atomic bomb was a distant possibility, theoretical achievement, something that required time and resources they assumed only Germany possessed. Then, without warning, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A British officer entered, holding A crisp piece of paper? He didn't smile. He didn't gesture dramatically. Simply delivered the message as if reading the weather report. Gentlemen, single American bomb has destroyed the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The generals froze. For a moment, silence hung awkwardly. Then came a burst of laughter, genuine, loud, mocking. Impossible, one of them said. Pure propaganda, another scoffed. Heisenberg shook his head, amused, dismissing the idea. Entirely. One bomb cannot destroy a whole city, he said confidently. The energy required would be beyond anything achievable. The officer didn't argue. He simply repeated the details. The weapon was atomic. It used nuclear fission. ... Laughter stopped instantly. Chairs scraped softly. Eyes widened. Even those who had mocked the idea now stared at the officer, searching his expression for any sign of deception. There was none. Heisenberg's posture changed. He leaned forward, brows tightening, his mind suddenly calculating, recalculating. Questioning Otto Hahn's face lost color. Others exchanged glances, quick, nervous, confused. The officers left them alone. Within minutes, the room filled with whispers. The generals surrounded Heisenberg, demanding answers. Was it possible? Could uranium behave that way? Did America really do what we failed to? Their voices overlapped, urgent now, stripped of pride. Heisenberg paced again, but this time the confidence was gone. His mind raced through equations he once dismissed as theoretical. He replayed old calculations, moments where he doubted measurements, decisions made years earlier. He muttered to himself, tracing imaginary numbers on the air. The others watched him like soldiers watching their commanding officer during a crisis. The debate grew louder. Some argued the design was impossible. Others insisted the Americans must have used plutonium. A few whispered the unthinkable, that Germany had underestimated America. Every assumption they'd held for years began to crumble. And then Otto Hahn whispered something that chilled the room. If this is true, then we have lost more than the war. We have lost the future. The men fell silent. The weight of that sentence pressed on all of them. For the first time, the German generals understood the magnitude of what had happened. The Allies hadn't just won the battlefield, they had leaped into a new era of warfare. Okay? And these scientists? Once the pride of the Reich had been left behind. The hours that followed felt like a storm trapped inside four walls. The German generals scattered into smaller groups, each corner a farm hall, echoing with arguments, calculations, disbelief, and the growing sting of humiliation. What had begun as laughter was now unraveling into panic. It was all being captured, every word, by the hidden microphones. The British had carefully placed months earlier. Werner Heisenberg stood at the center of the chaos, chalk in hand, facing a large blackboard the officers had provided for intellectual comfort. Now that board became the battlefield. He drew circles, lines, reaction chains, scribbling faster than the others could speak. The numbers didn't lie. The energy release, the neutron flow, the required purity of uranium, every detail revealed the same conclusion. America had achieved the impossible. The others watched as Heisenberg's confidence cracked. This cannot be correct, he muttered, wiping the board so aggressively that dust rose like smoke. To reach critical mass, the Americans would need industrial resources beyond comprehension. They would need massive enrichment plants, entire factories dedicated to uranium. His voice shook slightly, not out of fear, but out of the realization that he had miscalculated the scale of what the United States had been doing behind the curtain of war. One general stepped closer. Are you saying they did what we said? It was impossible. Heisenberg didn't answer immediately, simply stared at the board, breathing heavily. Then he whispered the truth. Yes, they did. Across the room, Otto Hahn sat with his head in his hands. This was the man whose discovery of nuclear fission in 1938 had made the atomic bomb theoretically possible. Now, he whispered, almost trembling, I am responsible for all of this. The microphones caught his anguish raw, unguarded. He spoke of guilt, of the horror that his scientific curiosity had unleashed something beyond human control. My discovery has killed hundreds of thousands, he said. How do I live with that? K? His fellow scientists tried to comfort him, but their words rang hollow. Han wasn't thinking about politics or military outcomes. He was thinking about human lives reduced to ash in seconds. His despair was so deep that, as recordings reveal, he spoke quietly about ending his life. The weight of Hiroshima crushed him in a way that no interrogation ever could. Heisenberg returned to the board one final time that night. He recalculated everything, determined to find some flaw, some reason to believe America's bomb was exaggerated. But every equation led to the same conclusion: America's physics. Engineering and industrial might had surpassed them completely. Farm Hall had become a courtroom, and the verdict was in. Germany hadn't just been defeated, they'd been outclassed, outpaced, and overshadowed by a nation they once mocked as scientifically inferior. The next morning, at Farm Hall began with a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. The same men who once spoke with absolute certainty now moved like shadows, each lost in his own thoughts. The shock of Hiroshima still pulsed through the house, but beneath it, another question had begun to grow, one more painful than the news itself. How did Germany fail? How did a nation that prided itself on precision, engineering, and scientific brilliance lose the race for the most powerful weapon ever created? The British microphones captured the slow unraveling of their confidence. Breakfast? Their conversations sounded like confessions. One general stirred his tea and whispered, "We underestimated them. All of us." Another replied sharply, "No, the leadership underestimated science. That was our true failure." It was the first time any of them spoke openly about the internal fractures that plagued Germany's nuclear program. By mid-morning, the men gathered in the drawing room. Heisenberg stood by the window, staring out at the calm English landscape, then turned to the group. "We must ask ourselves," he said with quiet frustration, "why did our work stop while theirs advanced?" His voice held no anger, now only disbelief. The others began to list everything that had gone wrong. They talked about Hitler's impatience, how he demanded quick weapons, instant victories, immediate results. They spoke about how the Nazi leadership didn't understand atomic physics and dismissed it as irrelevant to the war. They wanted rockets and tanks. One scientist said bitterly, they wanted wonders that could be built in months, not theories that required years. Another added, "We lost precious time arguing for materials, for resources, for permission. Every decision required another meeting, another signature, another approval." As they peeled back their own failures, the truth hit them harder than any bomb. Germany's downfall wasn't just military defeat, it was intellectual collapse. A system built on fear and obedience had crushed the very innovation it needed most. Heisenberg paced again, his mind racing. Hitler never trusted scientists, he said. He trusted soldiers, mystics, and dreamers, not us. The room hummed with agreement. They remembered the canceled projects, the underfunded labs, the reassignments to meaningless tasks. Remembered how many brilliant minds fled Germany before the war, escaping persecution while their talents eventually served the Allies. Then another general raised the question that pulled their attention back into tension. Even with leadership failures, could we have done it? Could Germany have built the bomb first? The room froze. This was the question they had avoided for years. It's the question they had buried under excuses, pride, and war. Heisenberg turned to the chalkboard once again. Science was there, he said. The theory was known. But theory alone is not a bomb. He wrote 2 words on the board. Industrial scale. We never had it, he said. Not even close. Germany had brilliant physicists, but America had factories the size of cities. Entire towns dedicated to separating uranium. Tens of thousands of workers doing a task Germany tried to complete with a handful of scientists in cramped laboratories. There, pride crumbled further. They didn't fail because they lacked intelligence. They failed because they lacked everything else: resources, leadership, unity, and vision. For the first time, they began to understand that Hiroshima wasn't just proof of America's strength. Was proof of Germany's own blindness. The moral weight of Hiroshima settled over Farmhall like a suffocating fog. The German generals and scientists were no longer merely prisoners. They were witnesses to the consequences of their own nation's failures. They had believed in Germany's scientific supremacy, but now the evidence was undeniable. Their country had lost the ultimate race, and the cost was measured in thousands of human lives. Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, a physicist who had once discussed atomic theory with pride, broke the tension with words that stunned the room. "Perhaps it is good," he said slowly, "that we did not succeed." The others looked at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Swan asked sharply. Von Weizsäcker chose his words carefully. "If we had completed the bomb first, Hitler would have used it. No hesitation. Cities, millions of people, destroyed. We would have unleashed horror without limit." The room fell silent. Every man considered the implications. The relief that they had failed was mingled with guilt, a strange, bitter combination. Otto Hahn, still trembling from the realization of his role in nuclear fission, nodded quietly. "Is terrible yet. Perhaps the world is safer for it," he whispered. No one spoke for a moment. The microphones captured the stillness. A historic pause pregnant with emotion. Discussion turned back to science, but now laced with fear and regret. Heisenberg and his colleagues reconstructed in meticulous detail the steps the Americans must have taken. Uranium enrichment, plutonium production, industrial-scale facilities, everything pointed to a level of organization Germany had never achieved. Even with the theoretical knowledge in their hands, Germany lacked the infrastructure, manpower, and resources. They realized they had been outpaced not by chance, but by a combination of scale, secrecy, and relentless focus. As hours passed, they debated responsibility and fate. Some spoke of leadership failures, poor prioritization, and wasted years. Others admitted personal mistakes. Hahn repeated quietly, "I am responsible." Heisenberg tried to console him, saying, "We all are part of the system. We acted under orders, but the moral reckoning couldn't be erased." These men knew the destruction they had helped make possible, even indirectly, and the horror it could have unleashed had Germany succeeded first. Yet, amid the despair, a strange clarity emerged. They were relieved, in a silent, unspoken way. Humanity had been spared their worst. Hitler's ambitions had been curtailed not by science, not by ethics, but by circumstances beyond their control. And in this realization, the first seeds of acceptance took root. The microphones recorded it all. The regret, the moral debates, the fear of what could have been, and the quiet relief. This was history in its rawest form. The war had ended, yes, but the lessons of Farmhall would echo far beyond the walls of the English countryside. Germany had lost the race for the ultimate weapon, and in that failure, fared a catastrophe of unimaginable scale for the first time. They truly understood that the atomic bomb didn't just end the war, it reshaped humanity's future. They had been spectators, participants, and unwilling moral witnesses all at once. Days passed in Farmhall, but the tension never eased. The German generals and scientists had moved beyond shock and disbelief into a deeper, more harrowing realization. America had not only succeeded, they had done so with precision, secrecy, and a scale of resources Germany could never have matched. The full magnitude of the loss pressed down on them. The discussions grew more intense, more desperate, and more personal. Heisenberg returned to the chalkboard once again, determined to understand the physics of America's achievement. His calculations were meticulous, almost obsessive, but each answer brought him closer to a painful truth. Germany was far behind, not just by weeks or months, but by years. They had lacked industrial power, access to the enormous quantities of enriched uranium or plutonium, and the sheer manpower to construct the factories required. Every assumption they had made about their progress now seemed naive. The Manhattan Project had been in operation on a scale they had never imagined. 130,000 workers, entire cities devoted to a single purpose, billions of dollars spent in total. Secrecy. Germany's labs, once the pride of science, now seemed like nothing more than small classrooms in comparison. The generals debated openly. voices rising in frustration. "We were brilliant," one said. "We had the knowledge. Oh, did we fail?" Another replied, "Knowledge alone is meaningless without execution. America had focus, discipline, and resources. We had ego and delay." Each argument peeled back another layer of denial. They realized that the war had robbed them of crucial time and that Hitler's mismanagement had turned potential brilliance into wasted energy. Otto Hahn's voice shook as he added his own reflection. "We thought we were on the edge of discovery. But even if we had built a bomb, Hitler would have unleashed it without hesitation. Millions would have died. Perhaps fate spared the world from us." His confession hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. The generals nodded, each feeling the bitter mix of relief and shame. They were soldiers of science, caught in a moral paradox, pride in what they had achieved, guilt for what might have been, and fear of what could have occurred if Germany had succeeded. First, Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker spoke quietly but firmly, emphasizing the moral consequences. "Our failure was our unintended salvation. Humanity was spared because we lacked the industrial might to follow through. The responsibility would have been unimaginable." By now, Heisenberg and his colleagues had exhausted every calculation, theorizing endlessly about uranium enrichment, critical mass, and detonation methods. It's be argued about whether America used uranium-235 or plutonium, how the bomb had been triggered, and how they could have replicated it. But with each calculation, the gap between theory and reality became painfully obvious. Germany could never match the scale, the resources, or the secrecy of the Manhattan Project. The realization settled over them like a heavy shadow. They were outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outmatched. The climax of their reckoning was not in words, but in silence, the collective understanding that their nation had lost not only the war, but the ultimate race for power. America had proven that knowledge without execution is worthless, and Germany's delay had cost them history. The microphones captured every sigh, every whispered word, every trembling calculation. The world would never hear their voices, but those walls contained a confession that revealed the depth of human failure and the scale of consequences tied to one decision. One mistake, one moment in time. As the days at Farm Hall dragged on, a new realization began to sink in among the generals and scientists. Germany had never actually been close to building the bomb. They had believed, in their pride and ignorance, that one decisive push could have brought victory. Yet, as they discussed logistics, uranium enrichment, and the manpower required, the truth became undeniable. A T had been racing against shadows, imagining a finish line that was always out of reach. The microphones captured their incredulity. Heisenberg paced the room, chalk dust on his fingers, voice tight with disbelief. "We overestimated ourselves," he admitted. "We believed our calculations were enough. We thought theory alone would carry us to victory." The others nodded, some silently, some with murmurs of frustration. Years of self-deception had painted a picture of German superiority. But now it was unmasked. America had combined science, industry, and secrecy in a way Germany had failed to even envision. Otto Hahn spoke quietly, most to himself. "We were blind. We thought the war gave us time. We thought our intellect was sufficient. It wasn't." His confession was a blend of shame and relief. Shame for the nation he served, relief that Hitler had never wielded the bomb they imagined. The generals revisited the timeline of their nuclear program. Germany had started early, yes, in 1939, with brilliant minds in labs across the Reich. They had uranium, fission knowledge, and a cadre of scientists capable of extraordinary work. But funding dried up. Priorities shifted to tanks, rockets, and weapons that produced immediate results on the battlefield. Laboratories were closed or repurposed. By 1942, the uranium program was stalled. Resources were scarce, focus fragmented, and leadership was indifferent. The theoretical possibility of a bomb remained, but industrial reality had rendered it unreachable. Heisenberg traced his finger along a diagram on the chalkboard, illustrating the gap between German ambition and American execution. "Whenever, in the factories, we never had the manpower, never had the secrecy. Even with all our knowledge, we could not have built it first." His words cut through the room. The generals realized that their perception of closeness had been an illusion, a dangerous mix of pride and hope. The conversation turned to hypothetical consequences. If Germany had succeeded, Hitler would have unleashed the bomb without hesitation. Devastating cities, millions of lives lost instantly. The moral weight of that thought hit them all. They had been spared from becoming architects of unimaginable horror, but the truth of their near success haunted them nonetheless. Their failure, once bitter, now carried an almost grim relief. The hidden microphones continued to record, preserving every whispered doubt, every admission of pride turned to shame. History would later reveal that these men had lived in a house filled with both genius and guilt, grappling with the consequences of what could have been. Their voices, full of fear and realization, captured a truth about human ambition. That knowledge without the right combination of resources, focus, and opportunity is powerless. Now that even the greatest minds can be trapped by circumstance. Germany was never close. Other generals had lived their final days believing otherwise. They were prisoners not only of Farmhall, but of the illusions that had guided them through the war. Their conversations now exposed the frightening gap between belief and reality. Genius and execution, ambition and outcome. By the second week at Farmhall, the German generals and scientists had moved from disbelief and moral reckoning to reflection on history and consequence. The reality of their failure wasn't just scientific hit, it was historical. They had lost the ultimate race, and America's triumph with the atomic bomb would define the post-war world for decades. The hidden microphones captured every nuance of their despair, regret, and strange relief, preserving a unique insight into human ambition under extreme circumstances. The conversation turned to leadership. One general remarked, "Even if we had the science, Hitler's vision would have destroyed us before completion." They remembered missed opportunities, diverted funding, and the chaos of wartime priorities. Germany had brilliant minds, but they were scattered, underfunded, constrained by a regime that valued ideology over results. The industrial power and secrecy of America's Manhattan Project had been beyond anything Germany could match. Even with its best scientists at the helm, generals now realized that failure was not merely technical, it was systemic. The scientists debated openly about what could have been done differently. Heisenberg reconstructed the calculations, once more considering the theoretical steps Germany might have taken to build an atomic bomb. Otto Hahn and the others interjected, calculating resources, uranium enrichment, and production timelines. Every theoretical adjustment revealed the same inescapable conclusion. Germany had been years behind, but men had lived in a delusion, believing their intellect alone could outpace industrial scale and secrecy. The Americans had combined science, engineering, manpower, and funding in a way Germany never could. The discussion shifted to moral questions. Could the world have survived if Hitler had succeeded? Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker remarked quietly, "Perhaps it is fortunate we failed. The destruction would have been unimaginable." The others nodded, understanding that their technical shortcomings had spared humanity from total catastrophe. Relief and guilt intertwined in their voices, creating a haunting mixture preserved on tape. As news of the second bomb dropped on Nagasaki reached them, the generals understood that Japan would surrender and the war would end. America had achieved what Germany had only dreamed of, and the world order was irrevocably changed. The Farmhall recordings captured the emotional roller coaster. Disbelief, horror, guilt, analysis, and a reluctant relief. Each man faced his own private reckoning, realizing that history would remember their failure as both a scientific gap and a moral blessing. Finally, the generals contemplated their place in history. They had been participants in a race that shaped the 20th century, yet their contributions had been insufficient to claim victory. They were spectators to the future, witnessing how America's focus, determination, and industrial might had won a war and defined global power for decades. The microphones immortalized their voices, their regrets, and their confessions, creating an unprecedented record of human ambition, failure, and moral reflection. In Farmhall, the war had ended, but The echoes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of lost opportunity and moral reckoning, would linger forever. The men had learned that winning the scientific race required more than genius, demanded resources, secrecy, and unwavering execution. And history had recorded their final conversations, showing the world what it meant to come so close, and yet fail entirely by the end of August 1945. Farmhall had become a quiet house filled with reflection, tension, and the ghosts of what might have been. The German generals and scientists understood the full scope of their failure. America had not only built the atomic bomb first, but had done so with precision, secrecy, and industrial might beyond their comprehension. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had ended the war, reshaped the world, and left Germany forever behind in the ultimate race for power. The men sat in silence, weighed down by guilt, relief, and disbelief. Otto Hahn whispered to himself, still haunted by his role in the discovery of nuclear fission. Heisenberg calculated quietly at the chalkboard, reconstructing America's method and admitting, finally, the limits of Germany's program. Others debated, reminisced, and confessed, revealing both pride in their work and shame at their inability to convert knowledge into decisive power. The hidden microphones had captured everything. Their panic, disbelief, debates, confessions, moral reckonings. These recordings, kept secret for decades, would later offer the world a rare glimpse into the minds of men who had once been at the forefront of Germany's nuclear program, now confronting the truth of their failure. History shows us that Germany was never truly close. The resources, the focus, and the industrial capacity simply weren't there. But sitting in Farmhall, the generals didn't know that. They believed a single decision could have changed everything. That one moment could have made Germany the first to wield ultimate power. The microphones preserved their fear, confusion, regret, and relief, a haunting record of human ambition and its limits. Hiroshima had changed warfare forever. The atomic bomb determined the end of World War II and the beginning of a new era. The reactions of these German military leaders revealed both the danger they might have posed and the narrow margin by which humanity was spared unimaginable destruction. In the quiet aftermath, Farmhall stood as a testament to what happens when genius meets circumstance, and when timing, resources, and moral reckoning define history. The war was over. The race was lost. And the world would never forget the lesson these men left behind.